السلام عليكم. بنبدأ الآن، فاللي متجه لمكانه يتجه لمكانه. خلاص أطلع أبدأ. أطلع خلاص. ارفعي لي يدك عشان أتكلم. أيوة بقر. طيب، السلام عليكم. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. أختكم خنساء أبو ناجي من مشبك. أهلا وسهلا فيكم في بلكونة. في أحد ما يعرف بلكونة؟ أوكي، في يمكن عدد قليل من الناس ما يعرف بلكونة. بلكونة هي نافذة نطل عليكم فيها من لجنة الدعاية والإعلان بغرفة الرياض، من خلال لقاء دوري نستضيف فيه ضيوف أو نناقش فيه بعض القضايا المتعلقة بالدعاية والإعلان في السعودية. اليوم إن شاء الله ضيفنا ضيف مميز جدا جدا جدا. أتمنى أني ما أغلط في اسمه لأنه اسمه شوي صعب. ضيفنا اليوم مصمم جرافيك، فنان، تيبوغرافر، وستوري تيلر أو راوي قصص من نيويورك. هذه تعتبر أول حديث إبداعي له في السعودية، وعنده فلسفة لطيفة بصراحة جدا في الحياة. فائز بجوائز جرامي، جائزتين، ومؤسس لأحد أشهر استديوهات التصميم في نيويورك، سجمستر أند وولش. خلال حياة مستر ستيفن اللي إن شاء الله بعد شوية راح يطلع على المسرح، كان مؤمن بمقولة لطيفة جدا، وهي أن التصميم الجيد يبدأ من الشجاعة اللي يضعها الصانع حتى تصل إلى العمل الأخير. اللي ما هو فاهم العبارة يسأله، لا تسألوني، بعد شوي بيطلع على المسرح. اسألوه وعصروه بالأسئلة. أنا مجهزت له لستة من 10 أسئلة إن شاء الله بعصره فيهم. وفي شيء بصراحة لطيف، كعادة كل الكرياتيفز اللي يحبوا يضعوا فلسفة في حياتهم. مستر ستيفن ياخذ إجازة لمدة سنة كاملة كل 7 سنوات. أتمنى أني أصل هذه المرحلة في الحياة قبل 7 سنوات كل 3 سنوات. شيء ثاني أنه مقسم وقته وحياته فعليا إلى 4 أجزاء. 25% مخصصة للمشاريع الفنية، المعارض، الجاليريز، الكتب، الأشياء هذه. 25% للمشاريع الاجتماعية، و25% للموسيقى، وأخيرا 25% للمشاريع الأخرى. ما ودي بصراحة أطول في الكلام، لكن ودي ترحبوا معايا بضيفنا مستر ستيفن سجمستر. بيتفضل الآن، وحديثه راح يكون جدا جدا ممتع عن الجمال في حياتنا، أثر علينا، كيف ممكن نشوف شيء جميل اليوم وبكرة ما نشوفه جميل. هل التصميم دائما جميل؟ كيف نصنع شيء جميل؟ وكل هذه الأسئلة اللي عن الجمال راح يتفضل مستر ستيفن ويتكلم عنها. بعد ما يتكلم إن شاء الله راح يكون عندنا فرصة للأسئلة، فإذا في عندكم أسئلة جهزوها، راح نطرحها عليه إن شاء الله للنقاش بعد اللقاء.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, hello everybody. It is a pleasure to be here, including the drones close to me. I will talk about the subject for the next, I think, 45 minutes or so, that many of my colleagues, many designers, many architects sort of like think is too commercial or old-fashioned or maybe just surface-related, something that isn't really worthwhile a serious person attention. And I will try to prove to you that this sort of thinking is not just stupid, but also literally wrong. And of course, the subject I'll be talking about is beauty. The probably worst thing that ever happened to beauty is really this sentence. I'm not sure if we are, just as a quick interruption, if the person who is flying the drone is in this audience. If that person is in the audience, I would ask you not to fly it. It somehow seems to distract me. Thank you. The worst thing that ever happened to beauty is this sentence. Because if beauty would truly be in the eye of the beholder, then it wouldn't make any sense to make anything beautiful. Because everybody would have a completely different point of view of it. It would have made no sense for the wonderful architects who built this small city that we are lucky enough to be able to gather tonight. And so many of these architects very, very clearly wanted to create something beautiful. But if this would be correct, it would make no sense. Well, luckily, it's not true. And I can prove it to you. So, let's see a show of hands. Out of these shapes, who thinks the square, number one, is the most beautiful? Couple of people, 5 people. The circle, lots of people. The triangle, 5. The rectangle, I only see 1 person for the rectangle. And the wiggly shape, also quite a lot of people. So we have number 1, the circle, very close to the wiggly shape. And then last is the rectangle with only 1 person. So I can show you how fast I am in my PowerPoint slide presentation creation. This is how you voted. Number 1, the circle. Number 2, the wiggly shape. The last one, this is the 1 person here for the rectangle. Let's try the same thing again with colors. Who thinks red is the most beautiful color? 5 people. Blue. Lots of people. Green. 7. Brown. 1 person for brown. Yellow. 15. Purple. Also quite a lot. Okay, here is how you voted. Blue is number 1. Brown is last. So in the opinion of this evening, the ugliest thing possible is this, the brown rectangle. I think we only had 1 person for brown, and we only had 1 person for the rectangle. So what do my colleagues in architecture learn from this? Well, there's lots of brown rectangles, and I'm so happy to see that in this entire district, I didn't see a single brown rectangle. Well, I first started to think about this idea of beauty when I did something exactly like what I'm doing tonight. I basically talked to a large group of people, and in this case, I talked to that group of people in Lisbon, in Portugal, and the conference took place in a castle. Now, if you think of a castle from a building point of view, from a functionality point of view, it's an extremely functional building. It was basically made to shoot cannonballs at invading armies. And in this case, the castle is South Church, it's above Lisbon, and I would say it's a good-looking building. And if you go look at the entry, it's perfectly symmetrical. It's clearly has been designed by somebody with beauty in mind. And if you look at Inside, every doorknob has been covered with ornaments, and even the murderous instruments themselves, the cannons, have been designed. If you look at these rings, there is no function to these rings. Somebody added them because they thought, if we're going to kill the enemies, let's kill them at least with something that's quite good looking. It would be uncivilized to shoot them dead with ugly things. Now from Lisbon, I went to Memphis, Tennessee, and there I spoke again. And in this case, it was the Cook Convention Center. And at that time, I was still smoking, so I went outside and I looked left and right and up and down. And I would say that a reasonable person would say that nothing here was designed with any aesthetics in mind. This was really pure function. And if you went inside of the Cook Convention Center, the significant cultural heritage, the musical cultural heritage of Memphis was now stamped into this hilariously ugly carpet here. You can see there is still a couple of piano keys and some guitar strings and some musical notes in this green-brown sauce of a carpet. That's what the designers of the Cook Convention Center thought of their musical heritage of their hometown. And I can say that, or I think we can say that Elvis had left that building a very, very long time ago. Now, let's go one back. How did that happen? Like, how did we move from the supposedly dark Middle Ages of Portugal to the much darker places of the Midwest 1970s of the United States of America? I would blame a single person, and that person is a fellow Austrian. I'm from Austria in Europe, and this guy comes from the same country. His name is Adolf Loos. He was an architect born in the middle of the 19th century into a time when Austria was still a monarchy, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and it was extremely powerful. So in Vienna, many buildings were built at the same time, and they built them in a style that was called historic. My mic is somehow going in and out, but let's see if that is working. Let's try. Okay. So there was a style called historicism, which really meant to steal from the past. In this case, the Vienna Opera House was made in fake Renaissance style. Right next to it, the mayor's office in fake Gothic style, and right next to it, the Austrian parliament in fake Greek style. And of course, Adolf Loos hated that. He thought that his time would deserve its own cultural language, that all that stealing from the past would not bring civilization forward. And he wrote a book that was called Ornament and Crime. And in it he wrote that it would be criminal for a designer to put ornaments in the design because it would waste the time of craftspeople. It would make things go out of styles quicker because the ornaments he thought were normally fashionable. So it would make things go out of style and become redundant. And this book turned out to be incredibly influential. He himself built like he wrote in the book. This is Wilhelm Müller. This is 1907, very, very early. This is way before the Bauhaus in Vienna. And he also built this house on the Michaelerplatz. And that was then known as the house without eyebrows, because it was so unusual at the time. You can see here the regular buildings with all the ornaments above the windows. And this was the first building anywhere in Vienna, but I think anywhere in Europe, that didn't have that ornaments above the windows. Apparently, the Austrian emperor who lived across the street, whose palace was across the street, had all the windows nailed shut so that he wouldn't have to look at this monstrous house that was built opposite of him. Now, Adolf Loos, when you go back, if you have a chance and go back to Vienna, actually built a number of very beautiful houses. And he was a big influence to the German Bauhaus that came about 10 years later. And again, the masters of the Bauhaus built some very beautiful houses. And then it was the next generation after that, specifically after World War II, from the 1950s onwards, that misunderstood many of the ideas of the Bauhaus and of Adolf Loos into a sort of economic functionalism, to make everything as cheap and as fast and as dense as possible, that really then covered our earth with this psychotic sameness that we still very, very much suffer from to this very, very day. Obviously, gorgeous things came out of modernism. I love this Ellsworth Kelly painting, and I very, very much also love the Seagram building on Park Avenue in New York City. Mies van der Rohe's building is actually a very beautiful building. But it seems that for every Seagram building, we get dozens and dozens of these public housing projects, in this case, just over the East River, half a kilometer away from the Seagram building, that really made people not comfortable living there. And the interesting thing is that this happened not just in capitalism in the United States, this happened everywhere. The Soviet Union invented factories that were portable and shippable. And they shipped these factories everywhere in the world to create these block buildings. They shipped them all over South America, all over the Soviet Union, of course, all over Eastern Europe. And at one time in 1970, 250 million apartments were built like this. If you do the math, 250 million times 4 people in an apartment, that's 1 billion people. In the 70s, 5 billion people were alive. That means a fifth, 20% of the entire world population were living in buildings like this. And the interesting thing is that even though this was all done under the name of function, the style was functionalism, the one thing that these buildings didn't do was to function. Nobody wanted to live in them. And so many of them needed to be dynamited 20 years after they were built, because crime rates were super high. They were not functioning for human habitation. So the interesting question is, how was it possible that a guy from Austria, a guy from Germany, and a guy from Switzerland, that they were able to tell the entire world how to live and how it should look like? Well, they did it with a name. That's the Museum of Modern Art in New York that was newly founded, made, and it was called the International Style. And this, under that banner, things that used to look like this in China now looked like this in Beijing. Stuff that looked like this in South Africa now looked like this in Pittsburgh, Alaska, and Anchorage, Turkey, and Istanbul. This happened anywhere in the world. Now, if you think for a second, how is it possible that the same boxy shape should be the ideal shape for the freezing Arctic of Alaska. And at the same time, it should also be the ideal shape for the tropical heat of Florida. It's impossible. This came out of thinking from the early 20th century, where people were so in love with machines, the Industrial Revolution was going on, that they said, we don't care about the shape. We don't care about if a particular wind goes through here that could cool our living rooms. Forget about all that. We'll have a machine that heats our room and that cools our room, and we don't really care about anything else. And this, of course, really did happen everywhere. It, of course, happened in Austria. It happened in the Philippines, where I'm just coming from. And, of course, it also happened in this country. This was really a truly global phenomenon. When we look at other items, it's exactly the same. So let's say I'm flying from Athens to Bangkok, to Sapporo, and to Sofia. The architecture will give me no clue of where I have just taken off or where I have just landed. Actually, the best way to figure out where I am would be if I tried to plug in my iPhone, because the only thing that I would love to be the same in all of those airports is, of course, completely different, because the electricians never really joined the international style. When I look at individual systems, it's the same thing. So let's say I go to the subway in Munich, but I could do that at pretty much any subway system of pretty much any city that's been created in the second part of the 20th century. So if I go in Munich, and I take the main red line. Hauptbahnhof will look like this. The next station, Karl-Preisplatz, then Theresienstraße, Fraunhofer Straße und Giesing. And I had always assumed that this is the best way for me to be transported from A to B, that this would be the most efficient way to do this. I thought so until I first went to Moscow. In Moscow, on the same ring, this is the same subway track. There's one station that looks like this, the next looks like this, the third looks like this, the fourth like this, and the fifth like this. What that means from a functionality point of view is I can sit in the subway in Moscow, I can read a book, I can read War and Peace, and intuitively I will feel when my lives. I don't have to squeeze my eyes and figure out some little tiny piece of Helvetica behind two columns. Am I there yet? Am I there yet? Am I there yet? So the functionalism was pretending in Munich. They pretended to work, but it didn't. Now, from a humanity point of view, what I noticed in Moscow was that at every station, people would quickly leave the subway car, take pictures in the station, then come back into the car and do the same thing in the next station. Because the subway system in Moscow has become its own tourist attraction. I can guarantee you in Munich, I was the only one who was taking pictures in the station. Now I hear from Abir that you are having a quite gorgeous subway station built here. I haven't seen it yet, but I will check it out tomorrow. I think it's a Zaha Hadid building, but considering I'm super interested in public transportation buildings, I'll definitely check that out tomorrow. Then there is a question of aging. Last year, I was lucky enough to be able to spend 2 months in Rome, and we also installed a show on beauty on this very same subject, where we are in a museum in Frankfurt. And I'll compare the two. Now in Rome, you have a lot of buildings from the late 19th, early 20th century. And it occurred to me that they kind of look good in any stage of repair. So if they're in good shape, if they've been recently painted, they look great. If there's a bit graffiti on it, it still looks pretty good. If there's a lot of graffiti on it, it's kind of still good looking, and even if they're basically falling apart, it's still okay. Now, the building in Munich that we had the exhibition in was created by a famous American architect in all white, and it's not a bad building, it's a fine building. It was an okay building to have an exhibition in. But what happens to it is that it cannot age. This building, it was built in the late 80s, has been renovated the last time 3 years ago, and already it looks like this again. So it's basically after 3 years, it already needs another, at least a coat of paint, possibly more than that. And the museum is basically spending money that it could be spending on new exciting exhibitions constantly to redo the building, because its design has been designed in a way that it's not possible to age properly. And I do think that that is a problem. Now, we learned from this in the studio, and we tried to counteract it, to basically take form seriously. And we found that whenever we took form seriously, it worked much better. So interestingly, we didn't come to beauty through some humanitarian, good people kind of direction. We came to beauty through function. We just found that if something is beautiful, its functionalities are much expanded. It works much better. And I'll give you an example. So a client of us had a lot of buildings here. So this is a underpass of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway in Dumbo in Brooklyn. Nobody cared about this underpass because it was an industrial neighborhood that nobody really cared about. Now this neighborhood is quite gentrified. There is a lot of offices there. There's a lot of new condos there. There's a lot of restaurants and bars there. So people have to walk through there. There is people going through there with bikes, and it stank really badly in this underpass because guys used to pee in there after they came out of bars late in the night. And our client said, do something about it. And they had a small budget, and we didn't want to put a big sign that says, dear guys, do not pee here. But there wasn't really, the budget was too small to do something significant, so we said, let's just paint the whole thing. And so we painted a very big yes on one side of the underpass, and we made it quite intricate, so if you would walk through as a pedestrian, you would have something to look at. And then on the other side, we painted a more graphic yes, so if you would drive through in the car, you would still have something to look at. And because it said yes in very big letters on this underpass, what happened was that freshly married couples started to use this as a background for their wedding pictures. So you could say that with one coat of paint, we transformed a toilet into a wedding chapel. I've always have journalists ask me, yeah, beauty is so difficult. Everybody thinks something different about it, and nobody can define it. And I say, no, it's very easy to define beauty. Here is one. It's a combination of shape, form, color, composition, material, and structure to please the aesthetic senses, especially the sight. Seems extremely straightforward and very clear to me. what does that mean for us? Like, what can we do as designers or as people? Number one is to actually recognize it, to actually pay attention. This can be, and I think the easiest way to do it is just to sometimes really look, but at the same time also to start collecting things. Now, everybody of us has a camera with us at all time, so collecting beautiful things is actually quite simple, and it's actually quite easy. In my case, whenever I see something that I like and I think is beautiful, I take a picture. And if I have a break at an airport or if I sit somewhere where I'm bored, I look through the pictures and I put them in files and I put them together either by color or by shape or by subject matter. And this sort of thing, because we used to design a lot of album covers, I also collect album covers, and recently many beautiful covers have been designed. These were not designed by us, but it's quite easy to then create particular collections of this. Even it's possible to make a collection in brown. There is such a thing as brown, beautiful things. Another possibility, not for publication, but for learning, of course, is to copy it. Every band that I've ever known started by copying their heroes, their favorite bands, and then, of course, you would have to go from there and then start to make your own thing. But this is a very, I think, beautiful, but also very unusual piece of typography done by a musician called Sufjan Stevens. And here is a young designer in our studio who basically, just for learning, copies this existing typography to figure out how has it been done, how did that actually work out. I think that the only culture that I'm aware of that uses copying as a learning tool right now would be China. You see here at Chinese art school all doing the same, copying the same piece of still life. But this used to be completely normal in basically every culture. Every academy from London to Paris to Vienna used to have these halls with Greek and Roman statues that were there basically only for copying purposes. And the difficult part, of course, is the creation of it. You see that beautiful things not necessarily have to be more expensive, even though they can be more expensive, but you can also make beautiful things out of very simple materials. But for sure, from a design perspective, it's much more difficult. You see, if I have to design, what do we have around? Let's say, if I would have to design a loudspeaker like this, and all the loudspeaker has to do is to be functional. I can design 25 loudspeakers before the evening is over. I'll design a tall one, a short one. I'll figure out what the function, like what the ideal placement of the loudspeakers inside is. I figure out the material, and then I can design many of them. It's no problem at all. But if I have to design a loudspeaker that's also beautiful, then it's so much more difficult. Specifically, if I say it has to be a beautiful loudspeaker that makes sense in 2020. Because then I'm suddenly in competition against 100 years of loudspeaker design. Then I really have to have a reason to design something new that is today beautiful. And that's difficult. That needs invention. And I very, very much suspect that so many of us designers were so happy about function because it's something that's so easy to achieve. It's sort of a cop-out. I think beauty is something that also isn't just an idea. It's something that needs to be pushed and pushed and pushed and improved and improved and improved upon. And I'll show you an example. This is a young designer who used to work for us, and this is his process of designing a single poster. This is just a poster for an exhibition in Zurich, and he went through hundreds of different iterations, really suffered in front of his computer, didn't stop with something that was sort of okay, but worked and just improved the form until he thought he finally had it. Now, this is the final piece. And this is 15 years old, but this was very much a newish form. This was very much a beautiful form, relevant for the year it was made in 2005. Another possibility is to ask others, to see if you can improve it, to ask if they have an idea how this form could be better. And over the past years, I actually opened my Instagram account to do pretty much that. People sent me in their work, and I try to, as good as I can, to give them tips on how to improve that work. I've been doing it for 2 years. It seems to work very well. If you want to send your work in, please do so. It's easy. It's an easy account to remember. Or even if you just basically want to check the tips that I give to other people, and maybe there is something in it for you, then please do so as well. 4 reasons why I think this is all important. It's not something that's just on the surface. So, the oldest tool that we have used as human beings is the stone axe. Looks like this. We've been using it remarkably for 1 million years. This is remarkable because we as human beings, Homo sapiens, we are only 250,000 years old. So we've made this tool 750,000 years before we were properly human. And every one of those tools is perfectly symmetrical. Now, from a function point of view, there is no reason why this tool should be symmetrical. You could kill that saber-toothed tiger just as well with a sharp stone. It doesn't need to be symmetrical. But we made it symmetrical because we thought it's better looking that way. There were stones found that are 10 meters high. There is nothing you can do with a stone that's 10 meters high. You cannot lift it, you cannot do anything with it. This was made because we thought it was more gorgeous and very much likely to impress a partner. Somebody said, look, I made this. I must be fantastic. And very much likely were influenced by this guy. Meaning, if you think of the peacock, he has feathers so long that it's a real drag to walk around with them. He can hardly fly anymore. And I would say that if I would have put so much energy into being a really, really good-looking male bird, that the international symbol of the World Wildlife Fund is actually hunting me down and eating me. I would say maybe I've overdone it with my desire to be beautiful. Maybe I should cut back a little bit. But the fact remains that the advantage of the peacock to attract the best peahen is a bigger advantage than the disadvantage of being hunted down by the panda. So even there, beauty remains ruling large. Number 2, as we've seen with the votes that you've given, that you preferred blue and that you really like the circle, and there is an evolutionary explanation for this. Everywhere, every culture around the world, the majority prefers blue, and that comes from our Stone Age times when the sea was blue, and a blue sea was a safe sea, not a dangerous sea. And when the sky was blue, it was a safe sky, not a dangerous sky. So you saw that you all agreed on a blue circle, but let's go a little bit more difficult, because who knows, maybe that just works with shapes. Now, I have a friend in the UK, Chris McManus, who is a psychologist who works a lot with aesthetics, and he developed a test with Mondrian. Now, one of these Mondrians is a real Mondrian. The other Mondrian is a fake Mondrian. So let's see. Who thinks, from your point of view, the Mondrian on the real, on the left is the real Mondrian? A couple of people. Who thinks the Mondrian on the right is the real Mondrian? Lots of people. Let's figure this out. Yes, you are correct. So we feel what is a good composition and what is not a good composition. We know that Mondrian worked very hard at these compositions because we can X-ray his paintings and we see he moved those lines around forever before he settled on this composition. And an audience, and he did not work with the golden means. So this works in every culture. A culture that is influenced by the golden means or not influenced by the golden means. It's just we all have the feeling that this is a right composition. Well, let's go back. Another example. There are travel magazines on every continent. And these travel magazines make surveys with their readers. And one of the survey questions is always, what do you think is the most beautiful large city, the most beautiful metropolis in the world? And if you consolidate all the answers from all the magazines on every continent, it's a little bit surprising, but maybe not so, that it's roughly the same 10 cities that always pop up. It's sometimes one is added and one is falls in and falls out of the top 10, but it's basically these 10 cities. And I've actually been to all 10 cities, and I agree with the readers of these travel magazines. These are all beautiful cities. But it's also true that whenever I travel to any of these cities, all the people from the ugly places around the world also had the same idea and were attracted by the beauty of those cities, and ironically bring that beauty down with them. And I'm sure that we have to, moving forward, we have to do something about it. Probably the best thing to do about this is to create more beautiful cities so that it's not just a few who attract all these people. And when I look at the area that we are all sitting in, and specifically what's going up behind us, I actually think that there is hope for us after all. Number 3, it's not something that is just on the surface. It actually has impact into our lives. There is an institute in Boston called the New England Complex Systems Institute, and they make a geographical map using Twitter information. They have a little algorithm that can decide if a tweet is more positive or negative, and then they will color a map in. If it's green, that area, in that area, more positive than negative tweets are coming out of it. If it's red, more negative than positive tweets are coming out of it. Well, for those of you who've been to Manhattan, You might know that there are two brick train stations there. One is Grand Central that looks like this. The other one is Pennsylvania Station that looks like this. Let's go back on the map. Penn Station, all was red. Grand Central, all was green. Let's look at the individual tweets. This is one from Grand Central. This is one from Penn Station. And as a proof that it doesn't just change the way that we feel, but it also changes the way that we behave, you can look at this tweet. People don't do this in Grand Central. This is the architecture making people behave terribly. And I know that you might think I'm just sort of like saying this as a funny statement. But this is actually true. If you, and I assume that many of you have traveled, just think for a second. Or check it out the next time you travel. I think that Europeans and Americans, when you are among them, are similar. There's not one that's more aggressive than the other. And you see this in malls. If I go to a mall in Europe, people somehow behave pretty similar than people behave in malls in the United States. Maybe in the States they buy more, but the feeling is similar. If you go to airports in Europe, people behave much nicer than people behave at airports in the United States. And that is a direct consequence of the terrible architecture, because the United States really, since decades, spends no money at all on their airports. They're always value engineered to the absolute minimum, and it makes people aggressive. I've never seen Americans behave as badly as they do on airports. They cut you off. They are really nasty to flight attendants. It's sort of a national sickness. And that is brought to us by bad design. And there is an incredible amount of social capital being spent and wasted in that process. Number 4. We worked with a scientist who runs one of the largest labs on aesthetics in psychology in the world. His name is Dr. Helmut Leder. And among many other pieces of research I'll show you that he did, I'll show you this one. He works with people who have advanced Alzheimer's disease. You see here on the left a normal brain, on the right a brain that has Alzheimer's, so there is real biological difference. And Dr. Leder goes into these homes, and he brings images with him. And he talks to patients and he says, look, I have here 6 images. Please pick the most beautiful one. And now pick the second most beautiful one and the third most beautiful one. And the patient has no trouble putting them in a lineup of what he thinks is the most beautiful one to the least beautiful one. Dr. Leder goes away and says thank you. 2 weeks later, he comes back. The patient doesn't remember that he ever met before. These are people who wouldn't recognize their own children. He doesn't know that he did the test or ever met Dr. Leder before. And Dr. Leder says, look, I have 6 images. Please pick the most beautiful, the second most beautiful, and so on. And the patients put them in the exact same lineup than before. So even when most of our mind is not working anymore, our sense for beauty remains intact. It's completely part of who we are. It's very, very much at the center of what it means to be human. Well, why should we care? Well, if we go back to the image that I showed you with pure functionalism. And we could say in architecture, it's still around, but it's going down. What we see here is not functionalism. The building behind us, that the shape of this building was informed by beauty. It was not informed by, oh, let's just make the cheapest roof we can make in order to, so that people wouldn't get rained on in one of the very few possibilities other than tonight, where it possibly could rain here. But this sort of work is still looming large online. Look at these interfaces. This is Airbnb, a hotel-like organization. This is Etsy, a craft organization. This is Facebook, a social organization. So 3 completely different entities looking exactly the same with exactly the same interface. And it's an interface totally, utterly dependent on early modernism. In fact, it's been stolen directly from this book. Jan Tschichold, Die Neue Typografie, and it has a date on it, 1928. So even though there was no internet anywhere closely, the internet was still 70 years away, somehow we as designers still completely rely on the rules and ideas that Jan Tschichold wrote down in 1928. And most interestingly, because Jan Tschichold, unlike all the people who copied him, of course, was a giant and a big thinker. So by the 1950s, he renounced this book. Jan Tschichold came out and said, I'm so sorry, I was much too narrow-minded. I was wrong. He even called it fascist. But it was too late. Designers were already so much in love with function because it was so easy to do that they didn't listen to Jan Tschichold anymore. Max Bill, probably the single most prominent alumni of the Bauhaus, giant of Swiss modernism, said also in 1950, we have to bring beauty back in onto the same level as function, otherwise we will not do any good work. And between the lines in this talk to his fellows with designers, he basically already alluded to the same thing. He also thought that his fellow designers worked with function, called themselves problem solvers out of laziness because it was so easy to do. Adorno in 65, the purely purpose-oriented forms have been revealed as insufficient, monotonous, deficient, and narrow-mindedly practical. And of course, last and most prominent, Adolf Loos, who started the whole thing. And Adolf Loos already in the 1930s knew that his ideas of ornament and crime were quite working in the way that he had hoped for. He delivered a set of glasses to a company in Vienna called Lobmeier. And I would say we can agree on that this is a beautiful set of glasses. Lobmeier still makes this set to this very, very day. And when he brought the glasses in, he also put a letter with them. In this letter he says, I can also see in the future little ornaments added to my glasses, like small, the nude human figure, maybe small animals, butterflies, and the like. And sometimes history is just so wonderfully happenstance because Lobmeier, the company, called up our company in New York to design the ornaments that would go onto the glasses of the author of Ornament and Crime. And we designed 14 glasses altogether. These are the 7 deadly sins in black. These are the 7 heavenly features in white. And if you are invited to a party or to a dinner party, and the host gave you that gluttony glass, you can wonder, did she do that on purpose, or was it just another happenstance? So, the question, of course, is not one between minimalism and maximalism, or between simplicity and baroqueness. Basically, everything that's ugly in the world is not ugly because somebody wanted it to be ugly. It's ugly because somebody didn't care. It's carelessness that makes things ugly. And Jessica Walsh and I, we designed a quite substantial exhibition. It started in Vienna, went over to Frankfurt. This was the white building that I showed you, is right now in Hamburg, and will continue to travel for hopefully a very, very long time. We see that the subject is incredibly important to people. We so far had over 250,000 visitors to the exhibition, so it's very clear that people are very much open to this. I just show you a couple of images. These are garbage bags as a proof that you can do something beautiful with very simple material. So these are tiny little ventilators that come, that like you see them in the computer, and they can deflate and inflate these garbage bags, and you can lie underneath it, and it's a surprisingly zen-like experience with the rustling of the bags to basically watch them blow up and make these various patterns. Just like we did in the beginning of this talk, you can select with cardboard coins all along the exhibition what your favorites are, and then behind these walls are plexiglass tubes where you can see how everybody else voted for which color. And so things are actually becoming better. You see it, obviously, behind you. I think a development like you've made here would not have been possible 20 years ago, because you couldn't have found the architects who would concentrate on really deliberate forms like this. And I think another definition of beauty really is deliberate form, like to really take formal expression seriously. But we can also see this from all the books that have been digitized. By now, millions and millions and millions of books are available digitally, and there is a data bank where you can actually go in and just see how often has the word beauty been used over time. And we see that it's in very high use in the 18th and 19th century, then goes deeply down in the second part of the 20th century, and now is actually in the process of going up again. For me, super interesting is, if you look at the 10 major world languages, and you can check out of all of these 10 major languages, what is the number one word that people want to have translated into English? The single number one word. And yes, of course, it is beautiful. So the next time a designer tells you, oh, I'm not really interested in beauty, it's not really my thing, it's sort of like, it's too cheap, it's too commonplace, it's maybe too conservative, maybe that is a good argument. The entire world is interested in it, so how is it possible that we as designers would not be? And, a little too fast, even the subway stations in Munich are getting better now. This is one of the newer ones, clearly much nicer than the one that they built in the 80s. for me, very satisfying to see, this is from last month, a architecture triennale with the title Beauty Matters. And I saw their press release. It almost sounded like our press release for the exhibition. So very clearly there is an impact going on. Things are moving absolutely in the right direction. And it was because Jessica and myself run a design studio. We created a little film that basically drives that home, that things do become better, that now is better. This film was made not with any computer graphics. This is all straight in camera. It took us a while to figure out how to make all of these things actually move. And we see this betterment really in every corner. If you look at some of the best architecture firms in the world, Herzog de Meuron, Renzo Piano, people who also built in Saudi Arabia, of course, Zaha Hadid, they now in the last years started to very openly talk about beauty again. A very big change from 20 years ago. Let's say when I still went to art school, that would have been a completely forbidden word. Like you were laughed out of the room in art school in Vienna if you talked about aesthetics or beauty. People just thought it was beyond their intellect to really talk about something as trivial as that. And I still have a tiny attack on you all. So obviously we saw that quote. And the quote, of course, is true. But I would think that you could also add to, these are not just aesthetic senses like the sight, but obviously the ear plays a big role in there. We all know the beauty of music. And I would love to try a little experiment with you all. Can I ask you all to get up? This is the last thing that we're going to do. Then I will leave you alone. So the music that you just heard, and actually the band who wrote the music to our documentary film, to the Happy Film, it's a Canadian band whom I love called Siskiyou, and they agreed to write a song for this presentation. So we have a song called the Beauty Song, and we're going to try to sing this together now. Now, it's a song that you've never heard of in your life. It's not even available online, so it's going to be completely new. It's in English. But we prepared for the text, we prepared karaoke-like sing-along possibilities. The difficulty is going to be the melody, but I asked the singer of Siskiyou to basically hum the melody through first one time, so that at least we can all get a little bit used to it. But here's the trick. This will only work when you completely put yourself into this. It doesn't matter if you hit the note or not, but it matters that you sing with enthusiasm. So imagine that you have a 4-year-old niece and it's her birthday, and you are the person to really sing happy birthday to you. That's how I want you to sing the beauty song. Let's try this. Well, okay. Can we make it louder? Still perfect. And you'll hear him hum the melody. just get the melody.
Excellent.
Okay, one more time, same thing. Oh.
Last one. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think that was pretty damn impressive, at least from up here. Thank you. I think that we are going to have a chance to do a couple of questions and answers, correct? Then come on up here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen. It was so lovely to have you here. We really enjoyed the presentation. We enjoyed the talk. I have some few questions. Then we will give the chance to the audience to ask the questions. So if you have your questions ready, we will just ask them in a second. So based on the presentation we've just seen and viewing your previous work and all the things we've talked about earlier, we know that designers are the visual communicators and the shapers of the visual culture. Based on that, would you advise local designers here in Saudi when they're trying to make their own voice in terms of visual communication, design, and visual arts?
Well, I think you already answered half of my answer in the question. Meaning, like, if I'd be a young designer in Saudi Arabia, I would completely, utterly concentrate to see how I can capture the contemporary feeling of Saudi Arabia into my design. You see, from a New York point of view, the work that we are the least interested in is work that looks like it's coming out of New York. Like, we hate that the most. But also from a local designer's point of view, right now, and I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is that some of the larger entities in Saudi Arabia get things done in Paris or London,
And some of the local design studios are missing out on those jobs. And I think that one of the reasons that is so is because large entities can do that because it's not localized enough. And while and I hope you saw that, I'm all for globalism, and I think that a globally connected world brought everybody unbelievable advantages. And at the same time, I've never met a single person in my life who thought that it would be a good idea that the world looks the same absolutely everywhere. So I think that the designers here or the design studios here who can figure out how to keep Saudi tradition, or how to translate Saudi tradition into a contemporary way that is particularly Saudi, I think those people will have everything coming to them. Money, fame, and satisfaction.
Perfect.
And you can pick one of those, or all three. Yes.
Perfect. The other question was basically based on the short film we've just saw, and all the previous work that I've seen you did already on your portfolio, that I've seen the focus on the craft side. All the scenes that we've seen on the movie was basically not made by computer, as I understand. So in this digital era where we are witnessing the transformation from being crafty and using and designing and painting things by hand into a digital, how can a designer keep himself a human and design for a human where everything is digital?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I look at it from a consumer point of view, for me as a person going through a town, I would like people and brands and companies to talk to me as a human. And so much of design is designed to look like it's being made by a machine. Meaning many people will be surprised if they look at a logo and they would think, oh, this logo I'm sure has been done by a computer, and they'd be surprised that there were dozens of meetings with dozens of people involved making these decisions, but at the end it looks like it's been made by a machine. And so I think that to bring craft or bring the handmade, be it handmade type or being handmade, human-made images or human-made things into communication makes a lot of sense. In the same way that if I call a company, I want to talk to a human. I don't want to talk to an answering machine. I don't want to talk to a computer. And so I want to be talked to in online as well by something that's significantly human. And from a doer point of view, if I look at it from what do I want as a designer, I think that many of us are finding it incredibly frustrating to sit 12 hours in front of a screen every day. And so the possibility, like let's say here, to do experiments with sugar cubes and make them fly and do this over, meaning this was, we shot it on
How much time did it take to create
we shot it on a weekend and we prepared for 6 months.
Okay.
So, but in this 6 months, like, you know, there was one designer in our studio who not full-time worked on it, but whose job it was to work on this significantly and basically to test things out, how these things behave and how that could work. And that's also more fun, meaning it's just also like to get a break from sitting in front of the screen. At the end, it's all touched by the digital world again anyway. Of course, we color corrected on a screen and so forth and so on, but I think from all entities, it's better that way. And you see in worlds where let's say in communities where the digital has been around for the longest. Let's say, like if you look at the young areas of New York, if you look at, for example, Dumbo or Greenpoint in New York City, where you have people people in their 20s who grew up digitally and whose entire work life was digital. These are the communities that go the most towards craft. These are the communities that plant gardens on their roof to harvest tomatoes. These are the communities who make homemade honey, who go back to basket weaving, because they find that being purely digital is ultimately not satisfying enough. And it's a meaning of, I've often been invited as the analog guy at a digital conference. And now I'm not surprised anymore, but at the beginning I was surprised that I sometimes was surrounded by 20 people in the early 20s pestering me about how to get a job in print, because they were already so frustrated with working on websites that constantly change and there's never an end to it and all that stuff. And, we did at one time a lot of research into happiness, and there on the very top of the spectrum, professionally wise, are people like cabinet makers who work with wood and see at the end of the day what they did all day, that have a satisfaction of what you made. Yeah. And I have to say, I used to miss some of those parts, because very routinely in the first 10 years of the studio, we used to build these very elaborate prototypes that needed a lot of craft, and they were difficult to make, and you kind of got lost in making them. Now that there is something of an equivalent in digital crafts, and we have designers in the studio who can get lost when they work at the edge of their possibilities, but it's not quite the same.
Definitely. This takes me to the next question, because I've seen a lot of art projects that you did to express the design aspect of something. How did you manage to balance these art projects with the design projects that are created basically for clients?
I think for a very long time, I hug back a little bit more. So the studio now is about 25 years old, and I divide it by sabbatical years. So every 7 years, I basically take a year off to experiment.
That's true.
It's true. Okay. Yes. And so these sabbatical years turned to be very influential on the work that we did. So I look back at the work of the studio as like the first 7 years, the second 7 years, the third 7 years. First 7 years, we very much concentrated on working in the music industry. And that was in itself quite artistic. There was quite a lot of freedom. So that's what we did. Second 7 year, not exclusively, but sort of like as a trajectory. Second 7 year, we tried to do half commercial work and half work for NGOs, charities, things like that. Turned out to be very difficult, because many of the large NGOs that are really effective have complicated boards, so it's difficult to get, and they are democratic, so it's difficult to get good work through. Third 7 years, we became more personal. So we did commercial work, but then also personal work.
Is this something that you planned earlier, or it just happened with the market?
Happened. And desire. And because of the year off, there was always a real time to reconfigure. If I would have never done the sabbaticals, we still might design album covers, and I would be wondering why business is so bad. Like somehow everything goes badly.
So doing these projects helped you to become a better design studio?
Oh, without a doubt. Okay. Yeah, without a doubt. I'm meaning indefinitely so. Okay. And it's, if I look back now, the projects that are close to my heart, I would say the projects that, with the advantage of hindsight, I can say this was really worth doing. Most of those projects came out of thinking from the sabbaticals. So they would have, I would say that they would have never existed without them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
The last question before getting back to the audience, it was a question that I've been pushed to ask from so many designers from the design community about the brief, which is the most challenging part of the design process. So I just wanted to know what was the most interesting brief that you have ever received from a client, and also on the other side, what was the most challenging brief? What really makes a good brief? Something that you get excited and makes you great at the end, great work.
I mean, I would say any good brief is incredibly short. A brief that is a page and a half is by definition awful.
Do you agree?
Because if it needs a page and a half of complexity to describe the goal of what the thing can do, the thing normally can never do this thing in real life. And there is a wonderful story that I had always heard, but in the meantime I checked it with him and it's true. There is by now, very much a legend in communication. His name is John Haggerty. He's a Londoner, and he basically founded one of the best agencies in the history of communication. And apparently he went to clients and he had ping pong balls with him. Okay. And he would take a ping pong ball and he would throw it at the client. And the client would catch it. And then he would take 5 ping pong balls and he would throw it at the client, and the client would catch none. And John Haggerty would say, "See?"
The problem is that I have few clients of mine in the audience. So that's perfect. What was the most interesting brief that you have ever received? For which project?
The most interesting brief, I think, from a commercial client was the shortest we've ever received. And it literally was typed on a piece of paper, and it came from Levi's, the jeans company, and the brief was 501.
What did you create? What was the design solution?
We created actually 2 things for them. So obviously the brief was just do something with the 501. I would assume that you know what that is here also. The 501 is a type of jeans that they have, a very famous one that has buttons instead of a zipper. Is that famous here or no?
It's known.
Yeah. And in the United States, the 501 is sort of like if you ask people on the street what is 501, they will know it's the Levi's with the buttons. And we had to design a poster, and the poster was for indoor merchandise, so it would hang next to the 501. Where the 501s are, so the poster would hang. So the first thing we did is we went out and we bought the 501 and to see what we could do with it. And then we took an X-Acto knife and took a 501 apart, originally just to take it into its parts, but it turned out that the jeans fabric itself, if you really take it apart, you wind up with a whole bunch of tiny little white threads and tiny little blue threads. So we really took the whole thing apart, and so that basically was one cone-shaped heap of blue threads, one cone-shaped heap of white threads, a tiny little heap of yellow threads from the seam, 6 buttons, 2 labels, and because the labels were part of it, we didn't even need a logo. So it was literally just a 501 taken apart, and we photographed it from above. And what it turned out was that it became so successful, like people wanted that thing in the store, and the CEO saw it, and the daughter of the CEO saw it, that the CEO insisted that they would run it as an ad, but it didn't work as well as a small ad, so they ran it as a poster and glued the poster into magazines as a fold-out thing. So it basically just worked for everybody, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do, meaning sell the 5 for 1, without a brief that talked about marketing insights. Yeah.
Thank you. طيب الآن دور الأسئلة، حتى لو الأسئلة بالعربي ما في مشكلة، خلينا نسألها بالعربي وممكن نترجمها.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you very much for the wonderful speech. And thank you very much for putting the effort to have this song done for us tonight. That is interesting. It's more of a personal question.
Sure.
When is your next sabbatical? And what is it that you're going to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, first, I want to give the thanks back to you because you were such an attentive listener in the first row, always nodding your head, so I concentrated on you while doing the talk. Thank you. And my next sabbatical is in 3 years. And I have no plans for it yet, but I normally start doing plans for it about 2 years before. And what I normally do is I start making lists of things that I'm interested in, so that when the sabbatical starts, I have a whole bunch of stuff that I want to do. And I found that in the sabbaticals, they work the best for me if I plan them. In my first sabbatical, I didn't know how to do it, so I didn't have a plan and it didn't work. I was basically wasting my time, which would be fine if my plan was to waste my time. But I really wanted to, I don't know, grow as a designer. So I made plans. And so my guess is, and I've done that for every sabbatical so far, I have a list of things I'm interested in, and then I literally do a weekly plan, meaning, let's say, Monday, 8 to 10, a big idea. 10 to 12, come up with something for an album cover. And it's like in kindergarten. I mean, it's literally a complete plan. And normally, after 2 or 3 months, there is enough projects running that I can throw the plan away. Then I don't need it anymore. Yeah. If you're more interested in sabbaticals, you can go onto TED.com, TED.com. There's a talk up there that I did on sabbaticals that sort of like shows the mechanics or so.
I think everyone is interested in sabbaticals.
Sorry?
I think everyone is interested in sabbaticals.
Yeah.
Hello. Good evening, Stephen. First of all,
I don't see you. Where are you?
over here. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we welcome you in the most beautiful country in the world. And I'm just wondering why you picked this topic, beauty, to talk about it tonight.
Well, it's just something that I felt nobody in graphics was talking about. And I attend quite a lot of conferences, and so many of my fellow designers still see themselves as problem solvers. And I mean, I of course believe that every piece of design has to solve a problem, or in other words, it has to have a function. Of beauty specifically for Saudi Arabia, it's something that is close to my heart worldwide, meaning, like, I have to say I was in the Philippines 3 days ago, and I also talked about beauty there. I am actively trying to get the exhibition, like we have offers for the exhibition for Canada, for South America, but I actually want to bring it to China simply because I think it's the most necessary there, because there's so much infrastructure being built right now in China, and so much of it is purely functional. And my little pet theory, I don't have real evidence for this, but my little pet theory is that one reason for the incredible desire of the Chinese people to travel, not right now with the virus, sadly, but in general, is somewhat connected with the incredible ugliness of many of the cities. Now that we've all seen images of Wuhan because of the virus, I mean, just look at this place. It is pure functionalism, and I, for one, I can guarantee you that no salary in the world, absolutely you couldn't pay me to move into one of those cities that they built in the last 5 or 10 years in China, because they are purely ugly. And it has nothing to do with the Chinese culture not being open for beauty. We all know it is. It's an unbelievable heritage, and we all know Chinese people doing incredible acts of beauty. It has something to do with this completely wrong-headed idea of the, I don't know, the engineering functionality world, that this idea that if it works, it's also beautiful. And you know, modernism for a while had this idea in form follows function, where there was this unsaid world that if it functions, it's automatically beautiful. But it isn't. All the things that are beautiful in this world, including the building that we sit in front of it, that I'm looking at right now, didn't become beautiful by itself. It didn't become beautiful out of the function. There needed to be a desire for it. Okay, look.
I will ask a question until the audience asks. Mr. Stephens.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, creating a beautiful thing is one project, and convincing a client that this is beautiful is another battle that we usually go through as a designers and visual communicators. Through your experience, is there any strategies that we can use to convince the clients about the beauty we are seeing in the outcome? How do you usually convince them? How can we at least start a conversation on the basis of beauty?
So if we talk to clients, specifically new clients that we didn't do work yet, so there is not a real trust situation yet. Clients that we worked for in the past and we did work that worked for them, it's much easier. But let's say new clients, we don't talk about beauty directly, we talk about the added functionality that we can reach through better form. If you want to know, if you want to check out somebody who does that really well, is a young Danish architect. He's a good friend of mine called Bjarke Engels. He probably, I'm pretty sure that he built something in Saudi Arabia. He's by far, he's right now the single most building architect, I think, in the United States. He's building World Trade Center 2. He's redoing the entire master plan for the Smithsonian. He's building the Google headquarters. So all the best jobs in the United States he's doing. And he is doing it through talking about added functionalities. And you can, if you Google him and you look at Bjarke Engels' presentations, you will find a good number of his presentations online. And I think he does a very, very good job at showing large clients that it is in their best interest to make as functional buildings as possible, and those buildings are always also beautiful. You know, if you look at it from a sustainability point of view, the most beautiful buildings in the world are also the ones that lasted the longest. The longest successfully occupied building in the world is the Pantheon in Rome. 2,000 years of successful, continuously usage. That is, it doesn't get better in sustainability. That is the most sustainable building technique in the world. And the reason it still stands, the reason why no culture of the many cultures that occupied Rome ripped it down was because it was so beautiful. And so many of the functional buildings didn't do that. So it's if a builder wants to build a building that will also be good in 50 or 100 years, one of the strategies would be beautiful. But Bjarke doesn't go to the client and say, I want to build the most beautiful building possible. He normally he explains it through functionality. Do we have somebody? Yes.
First of all, thank you. That was a nice talk. So there's this thing that I've been struggling with. I'm a visual designer and a UX designer.
Yep.
So whenever someone asks me what I do, and I reply with graphic design or whatever, they go like, oh, so you create logos.
Yep.
And then that's it. How can I explain what design is? How can I let them understand what we do and how important it is in our life?
And you say you design, you're a UX designer?
Yeah, I'm a visual designer and a UX designer.
No, I don't know. I didn't think that would be particularly difficult.
No, as a graphic designer.
Yeah.
Well, how would you explain? Because people find it so easy or think it's so easy to design something or to be a designer.
I mean, see, in my case, it used to be easy when we designed album covers. If a taxi driver asked what I do, I said, well, I make the packaging for the Rolling Stones, and everybody knew what I was doing. Now that it's much more diverse, it's a bit more difficult, but I still don't find it that difficult. And in your case, I mean, you would say I'm designing the interfaces that you click on when you're online, and then people will know, no?
Not really. Like, design in general, how would we explain it to people for it not to seem very basic?
Oh, well, I mean, if I explain something very simple to somebody, I would say, if they don't know what design is, which few people don't know, but let's say somebody doesn't, then I would say, I combine images and words in order to communicate a complex issue simply.
Yeah, but
But you can't say, I make things beautiful.
Yeah,
I can also say that.
And functional,
yeah.
I guess.
But I would say that in general, communication design would be that, the combination of words and images to make complex systems, complex issues communicatable.
Yeah, I guess because like design is, or visual communications in general, is kind of new here. Not new, but people started to, started getting to know what visual communications is like in probably 5 years ago. It's not an old thing here.
Yeah.
Well, it's an old thing. People started to understand it late. And it's very hard to make it seem like it's an important thing, especially in our culture. They see it as just like, oh, okay, you create logos. That's okay. That's fine.
I mean, see, I would say that I now see design much more holistic. And considering that most of us, also in Saudi Arabia, live in cities, and for somebody who lives in a city, doesn't matter if that is the head of the largest corporation or a taxi driver, everything, and I really mean everything that surrounds us is designed. What I'm wearing, the microphone, the stage, this, this platform, this park, the building, the street, the district, everything has been created by a designer. And all of these things can be made well, or they can be designed badly. So you could say to somebody who doesn't know is that the design, for a person who lives in a city, the design of that city has exactly the same impact on that person's life than somebody who is an indigenous person and who lives in the jungle, that nature has an impact on that person's life.
That's a nice way to explain it.
And the communication design, be that online or offline, be that a sign in the street or a map, is an extremely intricate part of that design of the city. And I think that's also the reason why pretty much worldwide, and I'm surprised that you say, like, I haven't heard that in a very long time, that people don't think that what we do is important. Because at least in the United States or in Europe, I haven't heard that opinion in decades. Because the stuff that we do, I think now gets much more appreciation by the general public than it ever did. I mean, including the exhibition we just did.
Yeah, we started.
It would be unheard of, impossible, that 250,000 people go to a graphic design exhibition. Impossible 20 years ago. Not even, these museums wouldn't even exist or wouldn't put on exhibitions like this 50 years ago. And I'm sure that if it's not here now, that's going to come very, very fast into Saudi Arabia.
We just started focusing on design. We know what design is, but it just started, like, people started to get to know how important it is now.
Okay.
Yeah. If you'd like to explain more.
I think she didn't communicate her point in a way that what she's trying to say is the culture as a whole is now interested in art and design more. It's here. We see ads for the last 20, 30 years, but it's not really from the heart of Saudi. You know what I mean? It's as you mentioned before, it's by international agencies that we work with, or a lot of governmental and public entities work with. But I think nowadays, more of the local agencies are aware, and they're trying to do their best to really show the local Saudi designers and represented on TV, on the street, or on digital.
I mean, I think that's what I've heard in the couple of days that I was here, that there's a shift towards local agencies. And I think that the more that shift can go, and the more true quality, smart, contemporary Saudi design can be created, the stronger everybody, the designers, but also ultimately the society will benefit from. I think that there were a number of questions here in the first row that I see that been.
Here.
Oh, but somebody else has the phone. Has
Yes.
the mic. Okay.
If
Yeah.
I can sneak a small question. We're talking today about beauty, and I would like to ask you about your experience in business. Beauty is imposing. The idea, the sentence, "This is so beautiful, it took my breath away," is almost synonymous in many languages. Does this affect your business process? Do you involve your clients at every decision stage of the design process, or do you make them wait and impose the design at the end by reveal?
So we actually are very, very good listeners in the very beginning of the project. and we want to hear as much as absolutely possible about the company, about the production, about the service, about the client, about their clients. We often go to their points of sales, check that out, talk to clients, find out as much as we can. We feel that our clients know their business much better than we ever do. And at the same time, I also think that I know how to communicate that business better than the client does. So we then really do go away and we make one presentation. And if that presentation is wrong, we discuss all the wrong points about it, and then for no extra fee, create a second presentation. And it has not happened in the past 25 years that we didn't nail it in the second presentation. We limit ourselves, of course, as we create ideas. We have dozens of ideas, but we only present one because it disciplines the studio itself to really work on one. As I said, while we do believe that the client knows their business best, we feel that we do know the communication best. And we have to. I mean, it would be unbelievably sad, considering that's the majority of what I spent my life in, on how to do that. It would be crazy if I wouldn't be better at that than somebody who didn't do that. And so that's been the way we do it, and I'm very aware that other people do it differently. And I've looked at many other models, and I can see that there are some other models that lead to, that have less friction, that yield less friction. But I think that our model yields the highest quality of work and the most functional work for the client. So that's why we stuck with it. Finally.
Finally. My name is Dua. I'm a graphic designer. I would like to thank you for the beautiful presentation. So here, I was thinking recently that beauty equals nature, because human must have the inspiration from nature with all the different environments. You said beauty equals human, so how can you explain this? Please.
Well, I think that we as designers very purposefully concentrated on beauty that is possible to be made by humans. Of course, there are gigantic other fields of beauty out there. Natural beauty being one, human beauty would be another, but we very purposefully didn't touch on those because we are not experts at it.
Yeah, also, a human can make beautiful things also. They make the ugly buildings as you show.
Sure.
So, yeah, the inspiration, the first one, it must be, I think it must be the nature for to have the ideal beauty.
Well, there's people who would significantly disagree with you. Let's say, if you look at Hegel, who was maybe the last of the big philosophers who really dealt with beauty significantly in the 19th century, he thought that, let's say, if you compare a flower to a painted flower, he thought that the painted flower will be necessarily more beautiful than the actual flower. Sorry? I can't hear you.
I think the painting, يعني, he recreate the beauty that he saw from nature into according to his point of view or according to his sight.
No, he basically thought that by definition, something that is painted that beauty needs to be understood with the intellect, and he thought that intellectual beauty of a higher order than natural beauty. And I'm not sure if I even agree with that.
Yeah.
What I do know is that I am not the expert on natural beauty, which is why we, in the exhibition and in the book, excluded or just touched on natural beauty and didn't talk about the beauty of humans at all, because also, for one thing, the whole thing becomes so big that you run into danger that you're just touching the surface of everything. But also human beauty, I'm really not an expert at it. So what I have to say is totally uninteresting. I'm basically talking about a lay person about it. So be stuck with things that humans actually can make.
Thank you.
And there's other people who can make exhibitions about natural beauty and human beauty.
Okay.
Can I ask one question, please? Here.
Oh,
Here.
okay, yeah.
First of all, thank you for this enlightening speech. I would like to know, what does Stefan do when he runs out of ideas?
Okay, when I run out of ideas, I have different techniques to keep that from happening. And I just tried a new one out yesterday, and it was pretty good. And it came, the technique itself came out of Stanford, and they did a test with it where they showed, basically they tested people when they came up with ideas while sitting down or while walking. And the people who walked came up with double the amount of ideas than the people who sat down.
Wow.
So I tried this out yesterday in the mall next to the hotel, and the rules are pretty simple. Obviously you need to have a subject, what you're going to think about. You need to have a phone that has a recording device so that you don't have to wait and write something down, that you can dictate ideas, that you basically do as many ideas as possible and sort them out for quality later, and that you put a time frame on it. In my case, it was 15 minutes. So I walked through a mall next to the hotel for 15 minutes, and I think I dictated about 10 ideas. And when I played them back afterwards, there was one good one among them. But one idea in 15 minutes is that's fine with me. So that's one technique, but I have a good number of others. Yes.
Hi. It's such a pleasure to have you, Saadi. Yeah. So if we think fundamentally about the function of those articles and those items, if we think about human, so the beauty is one of the items, one of the reason, the function of those items, because it's been created for human beings. So I'm just wondering about your opinion. What's created those ugly and boring architecture? It's not the functional, but the capitalism and cutting costs, going like for materials that use in different ways. So I'm just like to emphasize on the questions. If we think fundamentally, beauty is one of the function of those items. It's not like beauty versus functional. what you think about this.
Well, I think it's thoughtlessness that created most ugliness. Like if we, everywhere around the world, you can see around the cities these kind of areas of whatever, non-spaces, you know, a mixture between gas stations, fast food places, discount furniture stores, and you basically, you drive there because you need gas or you need a cheap piece of furniture, but you would never spend any time there out of your free will. Nobody goes and have a holiday in any of those spaces. You're there and you leave it as fast as possible. And the reason that the reason that we think of them as ugly and we are uncomfortable in these areas is because no thought had gone into them beyond their absolute necessary function, or very little thought. I mean, in the case of a gas station, a designer definitely worked on it and designed the logo and maybe the stripes or the way the gas pumps have been designed, but normally not very high quality work has gone into it. And I can definitely, it's definitely possible to design a beautiful gas station. And we've seen, as the Swiss company Herzog & Dimmeron, they designed a beautiful parking garage in Miami Beach, and which is now an incredible success, and they make parties there, and it's an event space beyond it being a parking garage. So I think that the most, and as we've seen with the castle that I showed, meaning a castle, a military building, is at least as functional as a gas station or a parking garage. And they managed to build them to be quite beautiful, these castles. These are now, meaning no castle now is in function, meaning they're all, there's no more function, no castle. I don't think there's a single castle in the world that functions as a military building, but all of them are still standing because we actually enjoy them, because they become tourist attractions. Now, I would doubt that the gas stations that are around now, once we go beyond petroleum and we don't need gas anymore, are left standing as tourist attractions. But they could be.
Yeah, I'm just like wondering if we put the beauty in the equation of like functionalism. Do you think this will solve the issue?
Yes.
Other than thinking about beauty versus function?
No, I think it needs to be function and beauty. And that will solve the issue absolutely 100%. Yes, I'm convinced of that. Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
Can you just reach the microphone back?
We're out of time.
And I think, we are out of time, so one more question, then we go home.
Sorry, thank you. First of all, it's an honor to have you here tonight. And my question is, how do you deal with creative blocks, if you've ever experienced any? That's it.
Easy. The most normal way is that, like many of you, we have numerous projects running at the same time. So if I get stuck in one, I switch to another and tackle the one that I was stuck on the next day. And sometimes something that I was working on with the other informs something that that I didn't think of on the other one. But a very easy and extremely effective method that I'm employing all the time is to start thinking about it from a point of view that has nothing to do with the project. So we can do this as the last exercise. Are you a designer?
Yeah, I'm a graphic designer and digital media.
So what is a project that you're working on right now?
My graduation project.
And what is it?
It's about combining the tradition of Saudi, the path, and putting them into a brand.
So you're designing a new brand for Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say my normal way of designing a brand for Saudi Arabia would be, I look at the existing brand, I look at all the brands of other countries around the world, and I check what everybody else is doing, and then maybe I figure out what Saudi Arabia's brand should look like. And very much likely I would wind up with something that's quite similar to to the other brands.
It's specifically aimed at doors that specifically in Riyadh. Each door had a specific pattern, and each pattern had a name. So from that name, I'm interested in typography too. From that name,
I don't need to know all this.
Yeah, I'm just telling you that.
Yeah, no. The question was what am I going to do when I'm stuck? No?
Brand, yeah.
So I forget about the doors. What I'm doing when I'm stuck is I start working with something that has nothing to do with it. So let's say instead of doing all the research, I might start to think about the Saudi Arabian brand by looking at this light here. So I'm thinking the brand of light, is it shiny? Is it goes from one place to another? Can I transform it? Is it a transformational brand? Can I start going from the extreme history of Saudi Arabia, and I look for symbols that when Saudi Arabia started, and try to transform those into 2020. Well, maybe that's a beginning thing. At the end, nobody will see that I started with this light, but that light forced my brain to look at another spot. Because if I ask my brain for an idea, what it will deliver to me is where the synapses are the closest. And that's normally something that I did before myself, or that I've seen somewhere else. And that prevents that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time.
Perfect.
So I will give the mic to my colleague, Sami. He will just do the closure. Before I go off the stage, I have to take the chance to ask you, what do you think of Bلكونة logo, which is the event we are hosting today? It's the yellow logo.
It's the
one on the top right and the top
this
left.
one?
Yeah. Oh, it's that one.
Oh, it's this one.
Yeah.
You know, I can't. Meaning, like,
it's fine. No one will cry. It's fine.
No, I literally know much too little about Arabic type. Like every Western designer, like we're all in love with the possibilities of Arabic type. So of course, I think it's pretty, but I can't, like I know much too little about it to actually give a proper feedback on it, other than, you know, some surface level silliness.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much. Sam, inshallah, بيطلع.
Thank you.
يعطيكم العافية. ألف شكر لكم جميعا باسمي وباسم أصدقائي في لجنة الدعاية والإعلان. حاب نشكر في البداية الشركات الراعية. حاب نشكر في البداية مركز الملك عبد الله المالي على الضيافة الكريمة. حاب أشكر كذلك شركة توبكس على هذا التنظيم. حاب أشكر كذلك أيضا الوكالات الصديقة معنا، وكالة همزة، وكالة يوبراند، وكالة بولد، شركة العربية للدعاية والإعلان، وأخيرا شركة سماءات. حاب أشكر الأخت خنسة وناجي على الحوار الشيق والحوار الماتع، أصدقائها كثير. وحاب نشكر ستيفن على هذا المحتوى الثري، على هذا المحتوى العظيم، وإذا في فرصة نكرمه درع يا زملاء. يعطيك العافية.
Fancy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Wow, look how fancy this all is.
أنا بعد الحديث صراحة ما أدري هي مجاملة ولا حقيقة. Is it really fancy or not? I'm not sure.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Thanks for staying. I really wonderful. Thanks for coming. Thanks for staying. I wish you a very beautiful rest of the evening.
Thank you. أخيرا شكر خاص مني كسامر شيد للأخوات عبير العيسى نوف إبراهيم اللي كانوا فعلا خلف هذا الإيفنت. أنا حقيقة يعني مستبشر جدا ومتأكد بإذن الله تعالى أن مستقبل التصميم مستقبل الجمال في عالمنا العربي راح يكون عظيم. من هذا الإقبال اللي جالس أشوفه في البداية كنا متخوفين هل سنصل إلى عدد 200 شخص أو لا، لكن حجم الإقبال الرائع أكد لي بإذن الله تعالى أن حنا قادرين. أكد لي هذا الإقبال أن مستقبلنا راح يكون رائع، أن حنا قادرين نبشر بثقافتنا بأعمالنا بتصاميمنا بكل ما هو جميل بإذن الله تعالى للعالم ككل، أن حنا نكون أيقونة للجمال بحول الله تعالى، وهذا عن قريب. كل الشكر لكم مرة أخرى، ونطل عليكم قريبا بإذن الله تعالى من بلكونات قادمة. يعطيكم ألف عافية، وكونوا على اتصال من خلال حسابات بلكونة في السوشيال ميديا. نشوفكم على خير إن شاء الله.